Elections in the age of COVID-19. I'm Scott Ott with Stephen Green and Bill Whittle, and this episode of Right Angle is brought to you by our friends at the Patriot Post. You can go over there and sign up for a subscription to their daily alerts and also get a free download copy of the American Liberty Primer that they're making available to people who sign up there. There's a link in the description below. Bill and Steve, we have a fascinating situation going on right now because of the coronavirus pandemic and the simultaneously occurring election process right now in the primaries, where we're trying to choose nominees for the parties. And then eventually, and not too distant future, in November, we'll have the actual general election. This has changed everything because social distancing has become the big rallying cry to beat this coronavirus. And the fact that everything's supposed to be washed and people are supposed to be washing their hands and you don't want to be touching things that other people have touched. And so we come to this. How do you conduct primary election days, and how do you conduct a general election? The governor of Ohio, Governor DeWine, has basically said, we're recording this on the day that he said we're not going to do the Ohio primary because it's too dangerous right now. And it seems we only have a few possible solutions. Stephen Green, we could do it online. We could do it by mail. We could develop some sort of new technology that allows you to do it in person but doesn't have you touch anything. Do you think we need to change something? And if so, do you think any of these options are preferable?
Well, okay. We've got at least a couple of different things here. The first off, I'd just like to say that I'm glad that the rest of the country is finally coming around to my longstanding view on the proper social distance. I don't really want people I don't know touching me. I really don't want people I don't know being within at least an arm's length of me, preferably two, and that's about 6 feet. This is going really well for people like me who have worked at home for 20 years, who don't want to be near other people. And I love this. It's wonderful. And I hope everyone can learn from this experience to be more like Steve, which should be everyone's goal, I think. Anyway, as of the election, as I think it was you, Scott, said during the backstage, this is a party process here, and it's really up to the Democrats to figure out what's going to work best for them. And if the Republicans had an actual contested election, and I'm sorry, I'm not counting Bill Weld or Joe Walsh as being in this contest in any kind of serious way other than, I don't know, stroking their egos or something. But that said, it's up to the parties to decide how they want to do these things, and I'm not going to tell them how to do that, except for the Democrats. I'm going to tell them how to do this right now. By the time you got down to your final, 8 or 10 contenders, it was a fairly robust group in terms of number of decades on this planet. So I think maybe the way to whittle this down without having to endanger your actual rank and file voters would be to get all of your contenders in a room with one guy who has tested positive for coronavirus. And then we'll wait between, 5 days and 3 weeks. And any survivors, they can continue the contest from there. We can call it Sniffle Dome. 12 candidates go in, one candidate comes out. And honestly, I'm thinking in terms of our Democratic friends, our actual human being people, not these awful candidates. This is for their own good, for their own protection. It's about the good, the health of the collective that I offer this modest proposal.
Bill Whittle, it occurs to me that there are several options in addition to what Steve's suggesting there, which of course will win the day ultimately. But instead of going full Hunger Games on this, we could do something like online balloting. We could do, frankly, just to take it to the other extreme, we could do nothing but paper ballots where essentially, you pick that paper ballot off the pile. Nobody but you touches it. You drop it in a box, and but still at the other end, somebody's got to count that thing. So, Bill, why not tap the technology that has allowed people to populate their homes with goods and services readily and rapidly, and essentially make this the Amazon.com election?
Well, when it comes to these kind of changes, I'm a big fan of the Hippocratic Oath, which is first, do no harm. And that means let's just kind of settle down for a little bit, because it's not like we've got a 36-hour deadline on this. People are still pretty rattled. This morning, we came in to prepare to do our shows, and it was probably around 10:30 in the morning, and Steve Green said, "Is it too early to start drinking?" And I thought, my God.
It was rhetorical.
This virus has shaken people to the core. You know what's interesting, I think, about this? And I think this will kind of come to an answer. First of all, I think most people can agree that this is not going to affect the Republican nomination process, nor is it really going to hurt anybody's feelings if they don't get to vote in the Republican primary for 2020 because of the COVID-19 virus. For the Republicans, it's a non-event in terms of the primaries go. What's interesting to me about the Democratic situation is the timing. If this self-isolation call had happened 2 or 3 weeks later, if in other words, if the virus had gotten here 2 or 3 weeks later, the numbers for Bernie would be, the numbers would be there, they'd be over. He would just have the numbers. And I don't think that's the case right now. I'm not sure, but I don't think it is. So I guess what I'm saying is, like, in the terms of
Biden would already have a prohibitive number of delegates that. Yeah.
Correct. So in sports terms, what that means is Bernie Sanders is mathematically still alive, right? That's what we say in sports when your team is looking like, no, there's no way you're going to make the playoffs. Well, we're mathematically still alive. If this happens and that happens and these two things happen and that also happens, then we could get there, which happened to the Florida Gators in 1995-96. So that is going to create more opportunity for Bernie supporters to say that, no, this thing isn't over. If it had happened 2 or 3 weeks later, I think you could say with some degree of certainty that, yes, there's no question that Joe Biden is the nominee. And people who are able to do the math and look into these things can tell that that's almost certainly the case. But it's not proven. Bernie Sanders is not mathematically eliminated. And if we stop Democratic primaries now, just for the sake of the argument, if we just stop them, then when time comes for the convention, he will go into the convention at least mathematically alive on the delegate count. And what's also interesting is to think of what might have happened if this virus, instead of arriving 3.5, 4 weeks later than it did, what if it were to arrive a month or two earlier than it did? What if this virus had happened before any of the Democratic primaries? Or especially, what if that control rod insertion of the social isolation and canceling everything, what if it had happened right after the Iowa caucuses and maybe bleeding into New Hampshire, and then they decided that they couldn't have any more primaries before South Carolina and Joe Biden's amazing turnaround? So it looks to me like that this is going to be, again, another sort of a non-event. I think what's probably going to happen is that I don't see how they can get offline voting systems in place in time for these things. I suspect that basically what's going to happen is that the rest of the primaries will be canceled. And as you pointed out, and I certainly don't want to steal your conclusion, primaries are not part of the constitutional process. They're relatively new in terms of our society. But the one thing I am sure of is I am highly convinced that the virus will have run its course and we'll be back to regular business as usual by the time of the conventions. And I am 100% convinced that we will be able to go out and vote in the national election in November. And that would be a good time for everybody to push for paper ballots and ink blots, but that's kind of another story.
Well, I think I would agree with you, Bill, that by November, it would seem to me that if we continue along the path that we're on now, taking the measures that we're taking now, that the threat will have died down enough. People, obviously, by that point, if we haven't gone full apocalypse by that point,
and we won't.
People will be.
By June, I think by June, things will be pretty much back to normal.
People will be going to stores and people will be,
Right.
things will be, the economy will be functioning. I'm not sure so much whether I'd want to be in a hall with 20,000 other Democrats in July at this point. But then again, I wasn't invited. So, I think that there are a couple of factors in this. First of all, it's somewhat shocking to me that we're not already at the point where we have an online voting system in which people have enough confidence to participate. Every balloting system ever devised by humanity is open to corruption. I mean, when it was being done with paper ballots, we literally had problems with ballot boxes disappearing or ballot boxes being stuffed or dead people voting on paper ballots that, somehow they were able to slip through the crack in the coffin to get them to register their preference. So, every system is corruptible. But this society has come to rely so heavily, not just transactionally in purchasing things, but in managing inventory, in being able to manage business logistics and supply chain and all of that other kind of stuff with a high degree of security and breaches along the way that cause trouble. But all of that can be done. And the fact that we treat voting as something that's completely other, that, the idea of saying we're going to do that electronically, that you could be able to pull out your smartphone and register your vote, that somehow that is anathema when every other aspect of your life you entrust to that and your data is out there and everybody can see it and you're on Facebook and you're tracking your location, all of that. I think it's at a certain point we get to realize, hey, yeah, everything else is this way. There's nothing wrong with voting being this way too. And if you want to do it on paper, that's fine. That could be an option that we could provide for people. I have repeatedly stated that I don't care how the parties pick their nominees. And frankly, I think there's some benefits to going back to letting party bosses choose the nominees. And you say, oh, that's not democratic. It most certainly is, because the party bosses have to choose a nominee that will be inspiring enough to the base of the party and to a certain number of independents and soft members of the other party to get them to show up in November. So these are the people who are most intimately involved with this process. They know the candidates better than the average voter does, and they have an opportunity to restore the role of parties as they used to be in politics. Now, that may sound crazy to most people, and I understand that, but I don't think we're necessarily getting better results by making everybody think that we're having some sort of a democracy when we go to the polls. I mean, the last ballot I saw had a dozen judge candidates on it. Do I know the strengths and weaknesses of all these judge candidates vis-a-vis their opponents in the primary? No. But it's the illusion of democracy. In a sense, I would rather have some guy who really knows these people involved in their appointment. And if they appoint corrupt judges, well, then the party boss's job is in jeopardy, or he's not able to muster enough people to show up in the general election. Anyway, so there's my case for Tammany Hall coming back. But that's, I think that we are going to change the way we cope with each other or deal with each other in society. I think the way we do elections is next on the review block, on the reformation block. I mean, frankly, I don't know if we're going to be able to have a system where you go in and touch a screen where other people have already touched. So I guess what I would say is keep your mind open to ways that we could change our approach to this without losing the soul of what we're trying to do, without losing this idea of a representative republic. And I'll finish with this. There was a time when you voted in your local town when everybody showed up on the town square and they said, "How many people for Jackson? Stand over here." How many people for Adams? I mean, essentially, we ran the entire thing as if it was the Iowa caucuses. It can be done. It's not the worst thing in the world to have your neighbors know who you vote for. If you're willing to put a yard sign out, why not just tell them? Ladies and gentlemen, that is it for this episode of Right Angle. We are glad that you have voted on the internet by becoming a member at BillWhittle.com and that you entrust us with your money in order to produce these shows. We're grateful for that. We're also grateful for our friends over at the Patriot Post, for whom we will provide a link in the description below so that you can get your free copy of the Patriots Primer on American Liberty. Yeah. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks for watching.